Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the July 20th City Council meeting. Thank you for joining us. Let's see where I am here. Ms. Gomez, would you announce the roll, please?
Let the record show that all council members are present.
Can we have a report on our closed session, please?
On closed session item 2.1, council gave direction to labor negotiators, and on there is no report out for closed session item 2.2.
Thank you, Ms. Gallagher. We have no proclamations, no staff briefings. Mr. City Manager, do you have a report?
Yes, a couple of things. ARC Shelter. The American Red Cross was requested by the fire department following a fire in an apartment complex on Aston Avenue. The fire caused the displacement of 55 residents, and based on the need, the Red Cross opened an evacuation shelter in the First Presbyterian Church on Pacific Avenue. Most of the residents were displaced due to a lack of electricity and gas following the fire. 26 residents slept at the shelter the first night. Staff from the fire department kept in communication with the Red Cross to ensure needs were met and to provide them updates on the status of the utilities and the ability for residents to reoccupy following code enforcement's approval. The shelter closed Saturday night, and all remaining residents had received assistance with their recovery plans. Additionally, there will be an update on the city's homepage shortly. We're going to be opening a cooling center at Finley on tomorrow and on Thursday between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. The website should be updated momentarily, and folks can consult with the website about additional updates if it is required moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. McGlynn. Ms. Gallagher, do you have any report?
I do not have any reports today.
Thank you. Any statements of abstention tonight from the council? Mr. Rogers?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be abstaining from item 11.2.
Anyone else?
Yes. Mr. Mayor, I'll be abstaining from item 12.24 out of an abundance of caution. That's the continuation of the local homeless emergency.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving on to mayors and council's reports. We'll start at this end. Mr. Oliveris.
Thank you, Mayor. Just briefly, on Friday I participated in a press conference with our local Sonoma County Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and representatives of the California Hispanic Chamber of Commerce to announce their upcoming convention here in Sonoma County in August. So this was a good effort by our Planning and Economic Development staff and the local chamber to bring that convention here. So that's going to be some exciting times for that organization.
Thank you. Mr. Sawyer, this end. Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple things. The Santa Rosa Violence Prevention Partnership had its policy team meeting last Wednesday. We're in the final stages of finalizing our strategic plan, which hopefully will become to this body for acceptance in August of this year. Also attended the City Council Infrastructure and Housing Financing Ad Hoc Committee on Monday, along with Mayor and Vice Mayor, and today's wonderful Sustainable Garden ribbon cutting at City Hall. One thing I also wanted to add, if anyone is interested in being part of the advisory committee for the Santa Rosa Plain Groundwater Sustainability Agency, applications can now be found at sonomacountygroundwater.org or on the city site also. There's a variety of different advisory positions available, and I encourage anyone who has an interest in groundwater to apply. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Combs.
Thank you. I had the good fortune of working as a ham radio operator for the Terrible Twos at the Hawkeye Water Station on Saturday. About 80% of the riders got to my station, which was less than 100 miles into the 200-mile circuit. 40% of the riders were able to complete the circuit, which is pretty remarkable on a hot day like that. I am not sure of the total economic impact for our city and county on that kind of an event, but one of the women riders who was in first or second place commented to me that she had flown in from Salt Lake City and had never been to the area before. So it is, she had very positive comments about what a beautiful place it was to be riding through. I did not talk to her at the end of the ride. 200 miles is a long ride on a hot day. I appreciate that a number of our city staff also work to support staff at that event. Was lucky enough to tour the Family Support Center site yesterday and am interested in the dreams and plans for construction that will go forward on the block where the current Family Support Center is, and look forward to the community involvement process that will come forward with that project. And thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm surprised that rider was talking even at the geysers, let alone at the end of the ride.
She had a lot to say.
Mr. Tibbetts? Nothing. The only report I have is yesterday we had a meeting of the Long-Term Finance and Audit Committee. Spent a lot of time talking about the internal auditing function of the city, and there will be more to come to the council from that. Moving on, item 10.2.1 is a request from Vice Mayor Tibbetts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the reason for my request, and I want to thank Councilmember Rogers for seconding it, is because when we went through that exercise of the NOFA funding a few weeks ago, it became immediately apparent to me how you can stretch $3 million quite a long ways to create a pretty large number of housing, particularly very low-income housing for people in this community who arguably need it most, as well as permanent supportive housing, which really fits nicely with our Housing First goals and getting people off the streets into permanent shelter. So after kind of better understanding that process, I wanted to put forward some sort of a recommendation that really, frankly, is in line with what Councilmember Combs said 2 meetings ago about making housing a priority. And it feels like too often we're dealing with unassigned funds or money that's left over to address our priorities. And when there's something as fundamental to somebody's success and their later in life opportunities as housing, I really hope that this council can take a look at the money that comes in. And one of the recommendations I've made is the real property transfer tax. Look at the total value of that and make incremental appropriations every year of 5% out of the fund into the housing trust to continue supporting affordable housing construction. The reason why I've proposed 5%, and again, if we move this forward for future discussion, I would completely welcome and appreciate comments from the rest of the council and certainly from staff about how a successful policy would look. But the reason why I threw out 5% is because I felt like that was an amount that we could reasonably adjust our general fund budget every single year. If you look back at the history of the organization, back in 2002, and I use a 15-year window because I'm hoping we can ramp up 5% every year, bringing us to full funding in 2032. But if you look back 15 years, the city on average, general fund grew by about $4 million a year. And that was also during one of the biggest recessions that the city has seen. And so I'm hoping that going forward we can set something aside, make these appropriations for housing and for the families that need them, and then really just ensure that we're going to be able to produce housing every single year. And it's being done so in a way that the city can make a reasonable prediction about the impact to the budget.
Thank you for restating the question here. The decision for us tonight is to either put this on a future agenda or not. You had a second for your motion. I assume that Mr. Rogers is still there with the second. And so, council, your votes for putting this on a future agenda.
Mr. Mayor?
I'm sorry. Actually, I have a card on this too, so, but please, if you have a question.
I can wait till, well,
Okay.
I have a recommendation, actually, but I'd like to hear from the public first.
All right. I'm sorry, Mr. Coe?
Thank you, Mr. Is that on?
Yes.
Oh, it's on. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I just want to speak in support of adding this item to your agenda. We clearly continue to need to develop a variety of ways of dealing with the housing crisis that is before us, and this seems to be a measured and judicious approach to allocating funds over a period of time that would increase the resources available to help improve our housing situation. So I would encourage you to add this to the agenda so that it can receive a debate and, if warranted, the support of the full council. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate the long phasing of this proposal as well. And given that you're addressing not this coming fiscal year, but the following fiscal year, I'm wondering, and I am not opposed to placing it on the agenda, but what I'm wondering is whether or not it would be appropriate for the long-term financial policy and audit subcommittee to have it on their agenda to look at some of the consequences, if you will, of this proposal, so that they would have, so that the council would then have the comments by staff at that committee and also the council to bring back to this body for that even more robust conversation. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we could go forward tonight, I guess, but I'm looking.
I think that we have to go forward tonight on the question that's in front of us. That suggestion can be discussed when it comes back to.
So they would. Okay. So then I understand. Well, it's just a matter of timing. Actually, it's just timing. Okay.
So I think we're ready to vote on putting Vice Mayor's suggestion on a future agenda. Ms. Combs.
I just want to confirm that when it comes back, any legal issues about how we're tying the hands of future council, if it's possible to do those things, what the impacts are, comes back with it too, just so that I fully understand if we're able to obligate future councils in this way or if we're just making a suggestion.
Yes, we'll come back with full analysis.
Your votes, please. And that has 7 ayes. We have 2 sets of minutes on item 11. Are there any corrections, additions to the minutes? Mr. Rogers.
Just to reiterate that I will be abstaining from 11.2 as I was absent.
Okay, we'll take those separately. 11.1, any questions?
I'm sorry, and I'll be abstaining from the first set because I was absent.
Okay. Other than those 2 abstentions, I think those will be approved with the abstentions. Mr. McGlynn, the consent calendar. Fasten your seatbelt.
12.1, motion, contract award, annual slurry seal 2017. Item 12.2, resolution, contract award, asphalt concrete. Item 12.3, resolution, Transportation Development Act, TDA, Article 4, and State Transit Assistance, STA claims submittal. Item 12.4, resolution, Third Amendment for the Campaign and Lobbyist Disclosure System Agreement with Netfile Incorporated. Item 12.5, resolution, contract extension, F000568, Rapid Express Courier Systems. Item 12.6, resolution, contract award, janitorial services. Item 12.7, resolution, First Amendment to the Professional Services Agreement with Muni Services LLC for business tax administration services and increased contract funding. Item 12.8, resolution, First Amendment, Acela Incorporated. Item 12.9, resolution, professional services agreement, Second Amendment for Wellness Solutions, Inc. for miscellaneous employees. Item 12.10, resolution, approving a Second Amendment to the professional services agreement, safety employees, police and fire for wellness services with Wellness Solutions Incorporated. Item 12.11, motion, Stony Point Road widening and reconstruction Phase 2, Sebastopol Road to Hearn Avenue project update and contingency action. Item 12.12, motion, Project work order approval, US Highway 101 Bicycle and Pedestrian Bridge. Item 12.13, motion, project work order approval, Hearn Avenue interchange at Highway 101. Item 12.14, resolution, bike share capital program grant. Item 12.15, resolution, cancel purchase order and approve award of sole manufacturer purchase order for 2017 Ford Police Interceptor utility SUVs to next lowest bid. Item 12.16, resolution, transportation fund for clean air proposed project. Item 12.17, resolution, First Amendment to Professional Services Agreement number F001125 with a GHD for preparation of an environmental impact report and related services associated with the Spring Lake Village East Grove Development Project. Item 12.18, resolution, Second Amendment to Professional Services Agreement, Land Logistics, Inc. for contract planning services. Item 12.19, resolution, acceptance and appropriation of grant funds from the State of California Alcoholic Beverage Control, GAP. Item 12.20, resolution to allow access to city property, 550 Lewis Road, Fire Station 11, to construct, monitor, and then decommission a monitor well. Item 12.21, resolution, assessment lien against the real property located at 3073 Lamberson Court. Item 12.22, resolution, assessment lien against the real property located at 524 Palomino Drive. Item 12.23, before I read the item, there will be, the city attorney is going to relay a change that has happened so that it appeared in the contract. I had unlimited powers to extend the amount of money, so there's going to be a cap placed in here. Resolution, City Agreement for Homeless Services, Samuel L. Jones Hall Homeless Shelter and Homeless Outreach Service Team Program.
Yes, the city manager is exactly correct. We made some modifications, some clarifications to both of the resolutions under 12.23 to clarify that the delegation from the council to the city manager is to expend all or part of the $600,000 that the council allocated to homeless services last week, rather than an unlimited ability to spend money.
12.24, resolution, extension of proclamation of local homeless emergency.
Is that all?
Yes.
Council, any questions on the consent calendar? Mr. Rogers.
So I'm not quite sure where you want us to begin. So I'll actually start with a question that I had on item 12.5. That is the contract extension for the courier system. So my understanding from reading the staff item is that the $30,000 extension is for this courier service, which from the description seems to mainly be shipping agenda packets around the city. So I wanted to know, practically speaking, is there more to it than that? How many people are we actually mailing the agenda packets to? And then more broadly, how does this fit into our updated service delivery model goal and priority, particularly given that every board or commission that I know of gets their packet electronically instead?
Well, we do still pass paper around a lot, so there is a requirement from our city clerk that we provide paper copies for the public to be available on their counters and you know, for the public to pick up papers. So this is, I don't know exactly how much they do this, but it's a service that was bid, telling how many locations and how many times a week they do this service for us, kind of outlines the schedule as part of the contract. But it's more efficient to be able to get the papers on a regular schedule than just waiting for staff to, happen to be driving across town.
So if the request is that we, in the future, look at this item as part of our 21st century delivery model, I'm happy to do so. Right now, we would not be prepared to do that analysis at this point, but we would be happy to include that in our work.
Yeah, no, I'd appreciate that. That was just something that stuck out. On item 12 point, sorry, I'll have to come back to that one. I'm going to pull item 12.15. This is the police cruiser issue. Back in March, we had a discussion about this item where I had concern about not going with the local bid. This actually brings the local bid even closer, so for consistency's sake, I will be voting against it again, but did want to take an opportunity to point out that subsequently from that March meeting, we have added this conversation about updating our service delivery model, and my understanding is we'll also be discussing reevaluating our city's local preference at some point within that conversation. So for consistency's sake, I'll be voting no again, but happy that that conversation is coming forward. I had some questions about 12.21 and 12.22. Mr. Reynolds, if you had a quick second. So these are the liens on property. It says in the staff report that in both instances, the individual on record showed up to the hearing, was assessed the penalty or the fee, and that if they had paid off the fee, or if they had taken care of the issue, that would have gone away, the fees would have gone away. Instead, I'm seeing an assessment, I think it was $25,000 on one of them. Is there any indication why the individuals didn't comply? Is it that they weren't capable for whatever reason, a hardship or a disability?
No, Mr. Rogers, we have no indication as to why either one of the properties were not able to accomplish the task with the time frame that was offered to them through the hearing officer.
Mm-hmm. And they never expressed any concern with the ability to... I'm looking specifically for if there was a disability or an ailment that prevented, say for example, the one that had the trash cleanup on their property, that maybe they couldn't lift it and couldn't afford help. I'm just looking, I'm trying to just understand before we place a lien on somebody's property that they might lose their property over.
Well, with regards to Lamberson, the owner of the property has suffered strokes, but he has an extensive array of children. I believe there's 3 sons and 2 daughters that are involved with the process, and none of them have stepped up and cleaned the property up as of yet.
I'm getting, I'll be honest, Councilmember, I'm starting to get a little uncomfortable with the conversation because that's not what this process is about. I'm happy to have a wider conversation about the liens, but we're starting to wade into speculative conversation, quite honestly. So I am concerned about that in this particular venue, and I suspect the city attorney would voice some other concerns as well.
Okay, that's fair. Thank you. That's just what I was looking for. Thank you. I've got one more, but I'll have to have you come back to me, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Other questions? Mr. Sweatham.
Thank you. First, I'd like to pull 12.23, because I think the council may want some additional conversation about that one. And then on 12.12, the bike ped bridge. So thanks for coming down. In reading the document, I'm not really clear what this will actually be doing for us, because I know several different items have come before us. And my interest, at what point will the public have an opportunity to comment on the design of the bridge? I wasn't sure if that's embedded in here, because there was some community engagement language, but could you clarify?
Yeah, so the current process, Councilmember Schwedhelm, it's a project alternative environmental document that we're looking to hire a consultant firm to help us go through. The next stage after that will be the detailed design. So what we'll be doing in this phase is looking at what alternatives exist, similar to what we would do in an environmental impact report. We'll select 3 different alternatives. We'll go through a series of studies to identify the pros and cons of each of those. We'll look at them from an environmental perspective as well as a community acceptance perspective. We'll have community participation opportunities throughout that process to gain feedback, to hopefully select the selected project. Once we get to that stage, then we'll be bringing a separate contract for the design. And we're looking to, you'll see in a future meeting, we're looking to solidify funds to make that happen.
Great, thank you. That is very helpful. And then I had a question on item 12.14 about the bikes. There's different language. My only question is Santa Rosa slated, if we get this, to get 40 bikes or 15?
We're slated to get 15. Yeah, 40 was looking for a system-wide and the largest possible growth we ever seen going on in Santa Rosa. Right now, we're looking at just up to 4 locations with up to 15 bikes at this point.
So maybe I'll follow, because I know that the TAM, the Transportation
Authority of Marin.
There you go. It indicated, 40 going to Santa Rosa and more locations than was in the staff report. So however many we get, I think it's great. But
yeah, the staff report is exactly what it is we're requesting.
Great, thank you then.
Thank you.
That's all, and then I guess we'll come back to 12.23 after.
Ms. Combs?
Thank you. 12.7. And basically my request involves non-local being in Fresno. There is not a local entity, or there is a local entity that can provide this service for us?
There is not.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you. I appreciate pulling 12.15. I had a question about the local preference for that one also. So since it's pulled, we'll have a future conversation. 12.20, why are we going to decommission the well after we've built it?
Hello, Tony Gosner, Fire Chief.
Thank you.
Where somebody else is building the well, it's contamination, so it's a monitoring well, it's not a pumping well.
Okay.
So they're going to monitor monthly to see if any of the contaminants have migrated onto the property.
And is there a time frame that I missed in the report?
It's going to be about 1.5 years.
And they believe that they will have completed the monitoring of whatever spreading contamination there is in 1.5 years? I don't know anything about this, but it seems like a contaminant might spread for longer than 1.5 years.
Well, I don't believe our well on our property is the only well. There's other wells around, and we asked for a time frame. They said it'd be about 1.5 years process. Now, if they keep finding contaminants or the contaminants keep growing, and maybe it could be longer, but we're being told at this point it could be up to
So
a
you
year.
could come back if they needed an extension to keep
Absolutely.
the well
Yes.
open? Okay, because my concern was we might need the well to be open longer. So if that's a possibility, great, thank you. And I think we are pulling 12.23, so thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a card.
I have a couple cards on this. Yes, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you. So I did find my note that I was looking for. The first was on item 12.2. I noticed that there are 2 slots and we only received 2 bids. And one of the concerns that I have there is obviously with increasing the workload for one of the bidders when we're in the process of trying to figure out compliance issues. So I don't want to go too far into legal territory, but
So really, while this may be a finance item, I'm going to ask Jason to come up and talk to you about why we have to purchase this locally, because there's reasons for that.
And if I may, before Jason begins, our office did look over this process. We did look over the contract. We are aware of the, obviously very aware of the code enforcement proceeding that is underway. And it was our determination that this is appropriate and will not interfere with that action.
Councilmember Rogers, the interest in having two suppliers of asphalt is important. There's a lot of times when one asphalt entity is busy. There's times where the plant is closed and you still need to provide asphalt. So having multiple locations where we can purchase asphalt for our own business. This is our field services crew going out and doing work, whether we're doing pothole repair, patch repair, or actually doing a more significant capital project. It's the availability of having the asphalt for us. There are only 2 asphalt plants in the North Bay, and it seemed prudent and appropriate to have contracts with either of them so that we could ensure that the asphalt was coming with the appropriate temperature, the appropriate consistency. Each of the plants does have specialties, and so if we need to do a different additive, we would look to one or the other. So that's the purpose of having both of these with contracts. It just gives us the opportunity to be flexible and better specialize the purchase of asphalt.
So I guess my question is actually, in looking at the RFP, did staff reasonably believe that the RFP could be fulfilled based on our, as a city's, understanding of the surrounding regulations on the asphalt plant, as opposed to what their interpretation might be of the regulations around them?
Yes, we did look at that and we did confirm.
Okay, great. And then while you're sitting there, my other question was on 12.14. There was just some language in the staff report that made me a little bit uneasy. It says, "It is our understanding that the SCTA will provide the local match." That didn't sound horribly confident to me. So I want to see if there's been any kind of an assurance that the local match will come from SCTA, or if there's an ambiguity there that we need to work with.
At this point, we've been informed that there will be no local match required from the local entity. Obviously, that could change. We haven't received the grant, but it's the intent of the Transportation Authority of Marin and the SCTA, as jointly applying for this, that they will cover the entire cost, either through the grant or as a function of matching with their measure funds to make each of the local jurisdictions whole. But at this point, we haven't received the grant. We don't know exactly all the criteria that go with it. But that's the information we've heard from them.
And as your representative on the Sonoma County Transportation Authority, I can tell you I haven't seen any contract, but this is moving forward with the full support of the board of the SCTA.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Ms. Combs.
Based on that line of questioning, I'd like us to pull 12.2 and have a separate vote on that item. I share the concern of my colleague regarding one of the contractor's abilities to provide service within some of the requirements of our code enforcement office.
Okay, I have some cards here. We'll do that first. Dwayne DeWitt on 12.2.
Hello, my name is Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland, and I wanted to comment on how I've never seen so many items under consent at one time in the 24 years I've been coming to the meetings. That makes almost one item for the year. So I'll always remember that. That is a stunning amount. On number 2, what's important to me, I believe, is that we're in a time where you're doing these consent items on much larger amounts of money than used to be the standard approach. As I remembered it in the past, it was items that were up to, first at one time it was $50,000, then it was up to $100,000. Some of these items now are like multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars being spent, and I'm like, shouldn't those be under report where we could actually have a broader discussion of what's happening with those items? Now, I was just told by staff that I had to fill out cards for each of the items so you can keep track of my interests. But because of my interest in your time and wanting to be able to speak during the public appearances at 5 o'clock, I'll just point out next 12.8 and 12.23. These are big amounts of money, folks, and I'm hoping that you folks will take time to speak with the taxpayers as to why so much money gets spent, and you're willing to do it just on a consent instead of actually discussing with the public what's occurring and why it costs that much. And then I'd like to also invite you to look at the meeting that was just the minutes or the television broadcast of the meeting that was just held at the county about how people have concerns about how taxpayers' money is spent and how items need more transparency. And you can hear it from at least 50 other speakers there and not just me, because the item that was being heard there is going to come to the city in the future. So now's the time to start opening up on that. Open government task force recommendations and transparency and all the other good things, and I'll be done with a half a minute to spare. Thank you.
Anita LaFollette. Ms. LaFollette, you have cards in on 2 items. Feel free to combine those if you like.
I didn't know you were there yet. I must have got mixed up. He's right. There are a lot of things going on today.
I have cards for 12.20.
I've been someplace else. Okay, so there's 2 things that I want to say. The emergency proclamation is very important, especially right now. And I'm a little confused because I go over there on Wednesday and morning and they're still sweeping. And to tell you the truth, the news from the police department is that they're sweeping twice a day. And they're also arresting people for what you might ask, because loitering doesn't usually take you to jail, but they arrest them for loitering, and they arrest them. The last gal, I'm sorry, I went to jail. I went to see her arraignment. She was sleeping in her tent, and they arrested her. They let her go in the middle of the night, and she had to run home through the dark. Well, this was months ago, so it was cold at night. Anyway, I just want to say that it's inconsistent. If you have an emergency proclamation, I'm sure you guys are aware that the sweeps are going on, and that they don't let anybody over at 9th anymore. And so where are the people to go? Because you don't have any chaps. I've proposed a couple, but they've been rejected. So where are they to go? Because I need your advice in this, because I don't know where to take the gal. I have to pick her up at 4, but she's probably delayed. They said it wouldn't be till 7. Item number 2, if you're going to give a grant like this to Catholic Charities, I want you to come around with me a few times. And I know some of you probably have been getting my texts, etc. There are a lot of complaints that are going on that I'm picking up. First of all, there's no APS reports done, and there are people that are very sick. I just went and saw a gal in the hospital with stage 4 cancer. And why was she kicked out of Catholic Charities with stage 4 cancer on the street? And the rest of the stories I won't tell you about because there was no APS report, and I'm going to go make one tomorrow on her. I want you, if you're going to give money to Catholic charities, we've been asking them this for many years. I remember being here saying they need to be accountable. And when I turn in a report questioning, complaining, a grievance, I want a response. Same with the police department, but they've been a little bit more receptive to my complaints. So I would add that to the award and make sure that they come up with a compliance for some type of review process about the complaints that have been made, because they're very horrendous and it's not appropriate. And thanks for listening.
Thank you. Peter Cherneff?
Oh, good afternoon. I was looking at 1223 Catholic Charities, and first thing that came to my mind was Michael Keaton. He's done a couple of good movies. He did that movie, and I was trying to think of the name. I got 5 people trying to look it up. We couldn't find it. It was, he was with the Boston Globe or something, and they investigated this abuse thing in Boston, and they went from 13 to like 97 priests in a short investigation. And at the end of the movie, they got a list of where all these organized abuses occurred, which is actually part of the CIA Finders program, and they don't want that to be public, but that's what it is. And it's like all over the world. And then there was the lawsuits and such, and you know, somehow the monies end up back in the pockets of the church. And there's good people in the church, absolutely. There's a lot of good Catholic people, and even a lot of good Catholic priests, but the amount of money that they have is astounding. And you're looking at granting them money. I'm just trying to figure this out. They abuse, and it's not just the Catholic Church, a lot of the religions as well, Judaism, Christianity, all of them. But the amount of this organized abuse, they put out billions of dollars. And that's just for the cases that came forward. And the Catholic Church, I think, owns more land in this country than any other single entity. Maybe they should be asked to provide more opportunities instead of everybody paying for everything all the time. You know, ultimately, you're dealing with what I've told you before. You're dealing with a spiritual issue, which probably cannot be solved here. And I certainly am aware that I have run into too many walls myself. And I think it should be mentioned that under Agenda 21 that, you know, like Jerry Brown put aside $2 billion for people with mental illness, and the DSM now has over 1,000 diagnoses, which means everybody in this room's got at least 5 diagnoses, and anybody on the street's got at least 6. So if we don't do something, they'll eventually all get swept up and sent to FEMA camps where tens of thousands of people already reside. And since we are Santa Rosa and Sonoma County, one of the most incredible places to live in the world, I submit you take all these things into consideration that I have not done as well as I need to on your behalf, and that maybe we can all do better, and that if we don't, what will happen is going to be permanent and a lot worse for everybody. So thank you for your thoughts on that.
Ann Seeley.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Ann Seeley speaking for Concerned Citizens for Santa Rosa. I appreciate Councilmember Combs, you pulling item 12.2, because I too believe there are serious questions about whether the Bodine Company can meet the contract requirements that you might have because of its still unsolved problems of odor, of noise, with relation to the surrounding neighborhoods. So please do have a robust discussion about this. Thank you. And want to tell you, I'm just delighted to see 12.12 there about the community connector bridge still moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the cards I have. I do have a question, Mr. McGlynn. Do we have any policy about what can or cannot be on the consent calendar as far as the size of a contract?
I will leave that to the city attorney.
Thank you.
I'm not aware of any dollar limit as to what can be on consent and what cannot. I have to admit I have not gone through recently all of the city policies, but I am not aware at this time of any limit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Council, we have, do you have notes on what was pulled?
Yes, so I'd like to present this to the council to see if I missed anything. We pulled item 12.2. Oh, do you have it written down also, Sue?
I don't, but I was going to comment on 12.2 that we would ask that the council continue that, and we would like to consider considering that perhaps in closed session so that we can discuss a number of aspects of that item. So our recommendation would be to pull it not simply from consent, but to pull it from this calendar, today's calendar, and put it on for the July 11th.
So do I need to make a motion to pull item 12.2, waive further reading of the text, and move it to the next meeting?
You don't need to do that. I mean, what I think the city attorney is, she's requesting that we don't take action on that item and that we table any conversation on this item because there has been lines drawn here, and I think that there needs to be some conversation in your closed session before you proceed any further.
So it shall be. Okay. So what we have pulled remaining then is item 12.2, or excuse me, 12.12, 12.15, and 12.23. Does that sound good? Did I miss anything?
No,
Okay.
I didn't have 12.12. Did someone pull that?
Yes. Oh, well, I have it written down here.
The bicycle pedestrian bridge? Mr. Schmidt had questions, but I think they were answered. So we're only pulling 1.5 and 2.3.
Okay. So I'm gonna go through the remaining. Well, first I move on the consent calendar item 12.1 and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Votes. That is unanimous. Yes.
So 12.2 has been moved to a future agenda. So I move item 12.3 through 12.14 on the consent calendar and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Your votes. 7 ayes.
I move items 12.16 through item 12.22 on the consent calendar and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
7 ayes.
And so with that, I'm going to leave 12.23 and 12.15 for conversation, or we'll pull those out. So I guess we'll move with, I move 12.15 of the consent calendar and waive further reading of the text. Well, 2.4 I'm going to step away from. I'm going to be abstaining from that one.
So hold on,
So I'll second that. Were you moving 12.15?
12.15.
Sure. If you don't need a second to discussion?
No.
We,
Okay.
12.15.
Okay.
Okay, so 12.15, is there further discussion about 12.15? Okay.
I would recommend that you go ahead and take the 12.16 through the 12.22, I believe is what the current motion is on the table.
Oh, we just passed.
Oh, you just passed it, I'm sorry.
No, we did 12.4.
So is there further discussion on 12.15? If not, can we have a motion on that?
I put that on the table.
You did, and you seconded, so
I
your
think we should
votes
just
on
clarify that it's
12.1.
about local preference.
I think Mr. Rogers did that in the beginning of the conversation. So your votes on 12.15, please. That has 5 ayes and 2 noes. The noes are Rogers and Combs.
So now item 12.23, I believe there's discussion.
Yes.
Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you.
Do you want to put a motion on the table first? Go ahead.
You erased that item. So I move item 12.23 of the consent calendar and waive further reading of the text.
Second. Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you. Were you going to say something, City Attorney? I saw that.
I was just going to remind the council that that is with the amendments as provided, the red line as provided to you today.
Which red line?
On item 12.23, both resolutions had revisions to clarify the city manager's authority to expend funds for Samuel Jones Hall expansion of shelter beds and for expansion of the host program.
Thank you. So the question I have for staff, and I know the city manager, I had a brief conversation earlier today, which I found very helpful, where I had a little bit of a disconnect with what is in 12.23, along with what we discussed at council last week, along with what Director Guine sent to us on the 15th of June, which states that the winter shelter is going to be open for 24/7 operations July 15th. So I found it very helpful. I don't know whether, Kelly, you could explain the intent of what this item is. That would be helpful to set the context, and then I have a couple other questions.
So essentially, between last week's direction received from council and this week, there wasn't time to incorporate all that feedback into the agenda item and into the agreements. And so I did put in some contingency language in the staff report and also in the documents, agenda documents, in the event that we received the direction to proceed with expanding the winter shelter to a housing-focused shelter. So what we can do moving forward is we can make amendments to the contract for that purpose, to expand the winter shelter into a housing-focused shelter. And we built in authority in the resolution allowing the city manager to make amendments to accommodate those changes. But I did not have time between last week and this week to make those changes in the agenda item or in the agreements.
So I guess where I was a little confused, because the message I heard from council was not in the event we go to a housing-focused shelter, it was when we do. And so that's why, because it's new language, so I guess I'm wondering why there's still some confusion about in the event we go to a housing-focused shelter versus when we do, because I totally understand there's time to ramp up staffing, but that is the direction I thought that we gave to staff from last week.
The language that was added gives the flexibility to the city manager to be able to make those amendments to the contract as it's currently written only covers the existing shelter facility. So in order to give the flexibility so that we do not have to come back to the council to amend that contract, that by this action, the council would be delegating that authority to the city manager, and he would be able to move forward. I apologize. What I was just clarifying to the city manager is the reason we can't put that into the contract tonight, specifically as to expansion of the shelter or expansion of the host program, is because we don't have those details yet. So we don't have the dollar amount that it's going to cost. We don't have the terms and conditions written. So that's why we did not simply amend the contract for tonight's item. That's something that we're going to have to, over the next couple of weeks, develop those terms and the precise costs that we want to put in. That's our framework.
So then would it be anticipated that it'd be coming back to council on, I believe it's July 11th? And again, just going with the timeline from the email that went to all council from Director Wine saying the 50-bed housing-focused shelter would be open by July 15th. So would the 11th, we do how would that work? I'm just trying to do a timeline because I know at least the sense of urgency I have for this, and I want to be able to provide any clarification to the city manager today versus waiting.
So you do not have to provide the city manager any additional clarification. The intent is to do that. I think we're caught up in legal semantics right now. I will, once the amendment happens, and I will share the amendment with the council, but it is not to try to create additional complications. The intent is to open as soon as possible. I will say, even now, putting a date certain is dependent upon the contractor being ready to provide that service. So even in conversations that I've heard recently, but that may not happen exactly on July 15th. They're in the hiring phase right now. Again, this is not the city trying to stand in the way or city staff trying to stand in the way of moving to a full-time, 50 additional beds, housing first focused. I think unfortunately what we're battling a little bit is what legal is going to let us do and the intent. And I don't want to be tied up exactly, if it turns out that it's July 23rd and we find that out on the 11th, the challenge will be we won't have had a chance to post that. I think that's part of the issue right now. It's clear to us what the intent was. We're working on that. We will keep the council updated. That's why the authority designation is embedded in the conversation. I think the city attorney rightly didn't give me unlimited ability to institute things. There was an allocation given Tuesday ago. But the intent is not to delay here. I think we're just caught up in what we can and can't put in a contract at this different, from what I'm understanding from the city attorney, about what I can do, and I don't want to complicate that. Our intent is to open, we hope to open by July 15th. We're working with the provider. The provider understands the expectation. We will inform council about the exact date that is going to happen.
Great, thank you, and that's very helpful.
And if I just may reiterate, the purpose of this language was actually to simplify the process so that we do not have to come back to the full council to award, to make those changes to the contract either July or 11th or thereafter. Obviously, the council is free to give further direction to the city manager at that time, but he will have embedded in this resolution the authority to make those changes to the contract as needed.
And then what is the process? Because there's some language in the current conditional use permit that I don't think is consistent with housing first. So how or when would we be able to address updating the conditional use permit? And what's the time frame on that?
We're still working through some of those details. I mean, we're going to bring that back when we absolutely do that. I think we have some flexibility granted by the state of homeless emergency that provides us opportunity here.
That's exactly correct. We'll be able to make those changes in light of the declaration of homeless emergency.
So we can do things outside the conditional use permit so that they are consistent with housing first. Am I hearing that correctly? If we continue with the emergency?
Yes.
Thank you, that's very helpful. And then the last question I had on the staff report, it talked about going out to RFP a year from now for this contract, which I haven't seen something similar with that. What is the intent and why are we talking about what we're going to do a year from now on this one?
Well, the intent was there had been a request from council for that consideration. actually a consideration to go out for an RFP this year in light of the numerous unknowns that we're still facing. Doing a staff's recommendation to me was not to transition at this point, because that would have been a whole process around transitioning in and of itself for that particular venue. So to inform the provider that there were potentially future considerations, we wanted to make sure the provider understood where we were standing and why we were standing in this position. Again, the council's free to amend that part of the contract, but right now, we're exploring options with our partners at the county side to try to move with the council to better understand what success looks like and a unified process. That's what staff believes. Without drifting too far into that area, we wanted to make sure the provider understood that there was going to be a attempt to have a unified approach on this issue down the line. But this is simply to notify everybody that there may be big changes coming, but council's free to adjust this particular part of the item, as well as to tell staff that this was not our intent and you'd rather go out to bid the whole process. But that is, as we said, the reason we're sitting here is that that's a huge challenge of itself to manage a transition of a facility of this magnitude. And as we're trying to understand better what success looks like, I think that's one of the struggles here is staff needs a better understanding, and we'll be having a conversation on July 11th to better understand what council thinks success looks like.
Right. And I really appreciate that. So the language, because the way I read this, and it's not in the contract, I read it in the staff report, this is what we're going to do. The may versus the shall, this kind of reads to me like a shall, and I'm fine with the may. Once we get additional information, 6 months, whenever we want to make that decision, what I'm uncomfortable with is that if we approve this item as is, and it's only in the staff report, not in the contract, I'm just uncomfortable with that firm of language. I'm comfortable we may, that's absolutely fair, because I think we may do that, but there's a whole lot more discussion after the 50-bed shelter is implemented before I would make a decision whether or not we are going to go to RFP next year.
And if council wants to put, shall in the contract, we can put shall in the contract. I don't think that would be an issue from the city attorney.
I guess I would be proposing may. It leaves our options open. I don't want to tie our hands today for a decision we're going to make months from now. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Just a couple of questions for clarification. The contract now does not say shall, is that correct?
There is nothing, with respect to going out for an RFP, the contract does not contain any language with respect to a requirement that we go out for an RFP or not.
So we're not setting anything in stone with the resolution and the contract as written?
Right, I was just looking through, going to take a quick look at the resolution to make sure there's nothing in the resolution itself that...
Okay, while you're doing that, I can ask another question for clarification. Last week, Mr. City Manager, we put an extra $600,000 aside for homeless services in the coming year. Part of what we are doing tonight with this item was already in the budget before that $600,000. Part of it was not. And I'm looking for the difference. How much of that $600,000 is left after we take this action tonight?
All of the $600,000 is available after this action because the funds that are budgeted for the Sam Jones Hall and host contracts were approved with the 17-18 budget.
Okay, so we're not even dipping into that $600,000 with this action?
No, not at this time. We're just allowing, do you want to answer that, Sue?
You are not specifically dipping into that $600,000, but you are authorizing the city manager to dip into that for these two purposes.
Okay, and these two purposes, if these two purposes were dipped into by the city manager, then what would the balance be of that $600,000?
We don't know what that is, which is one of the reasons that we have set it up this way, is that we don't know what those dollar numbers are going to be for either the conversion of those 50 winter shelter beds into a year-round housing first, nor do we have precise terms of what the nature of any expansion of the host program would be, or what dollars would be attached to that. So,
and I know it's hard to get into these kind of conversations before there's a contract negotiated, but is there
I think
a range that we can talk about?
Yeah, I think if you'll give us a second and we can talk about, let's caucus here and then maybe we can give you an answer to that particular item. But I need a second to talk to the team about that. I don't know. Again, we're still trying to have a contract negotiation with the provider. I'm getting really uncomfortable that we're throwing numbers around in terms of that contract negotiation right here. There's still a lot to be unknown, but I need to understand better what that is. But we're trying to get the services in alignment, and they're trying to better understand their need under the Housing First model. But let me see if we can give you an answer to that question if I can have 5 minutes.
Okay, we'll take a short break. We'll bring the council back into session. Mr. McGlynn.
So I think what staff can say at this point is that more than half of the money allocated last week will be utilized to convert the 50 beds to a housing first, to extend the 50 beds and convert them to a housing first model. That's what we can say. What I can't tell you is what the remainder is going to be. That I can't answer at this point. But there's a significant expense with converting to a housing first model, staffing changes, required changes at the site, and so that's what we can say at this point.
Okay, and I'm going to trust that since you discussed that so carefully that we're not going to get much more out of you than that. But council questions, Ms. Combs.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll let staff have a chance to get back here because I'm going to ask about slide 10 on this presentation, which we haven't seen, but I'm going to ask about it. So I want to be really clear that I support the Housing First activities, that I support that we're moving forward for that 50-bed housing-focused shelter, that I believe the host program is working to check on the vulnerability, and I'm not sure how we are on phase 2. I don't think that's actually a current housing first model, but I think it's being worked on toward that. What I do notice, though, is that the homeless encampment pilot project is listed here as if it's a housing first activity. And it concerns me that that project is essentially identifying encampments to move toward the 50-bed housing focused shelter. And that the housing focused shelter has the housing first concept going forward. But the prospect of taking a particular encampment and moving it to the shelter is not, in fact, a housing first model. The housing first model would be that we look at the vulnerability of the individuals in our community and move them into the 50-bed housing focused shelter rather than take an encampment as a chunk and move it in. So it concerns me that that's being listed as if it were part of a housing first activity when it is in fact not. How those are being prioritized is not based on the vulnerability index. It's being based on community complaint, fire hazard, and a variety of other aspects. So I would prefer to be clear about what is and isn't intended to be housing focused. As we look at that, I also noticed that we have an existing safe parking program that has been retracted recently because of lack of county funding. And in our conversation, there was a discussion about funding that program as well. I do not see it listed here or in any of the other locations. On my, it's not on slide 11 under other housing programs. This says requests. That's not the same standing as these other things. So that's a really interesting place to place it. I'm sorry, I'm talking about, it is a current, it has been one of our current, it has been an existing program. It concerns me the language that we're using around maintenance and amount of maintenance programs. We have received an email indicating that there are some necessary changes to make in the program in order to make it housing first. I think that's fine, but I am surprised it's not being dealt with in this group because we have people in cars now who need to be safe in their cars now. And so it also concerns me, just as it concerns my colleague, to get people into shelter as quickly as possible, that we have people be safe in their cars now too. I want to express my support for the 1-year RFP. I would have preferred it to be a 6-month RFP, and I would have preferred to see how it's divided up so that other providers are eligible. I know that diversity of service providers is more resilient and different styles and cultures in a service provider may speak to different people who need service. So while I can completely endorse and support Catholic Charities program, I can also see that there would be a need for some other programs to coordinate with them that may have a different style or culture. And I have certainly heard from individuals who have concern about going back to Catholic Charities after having had a problem with them under maybe a long time ago earlier situation. So I would like to see an RFP that allows us to have a little bit of diversity of services. I'm also having trouble finding a detailed list of services that will be provided for the funds that we're allocating. Is there such a detailed list, like an MOU type detailed list?
I mean, again, council is, so let me take a step back. I have requested of the mayor a scheduling of a conversation on July 11th to tackle many of the issues that the council member has just brought forward, because staff is frankly struggling with what success looks like, and a lot of the topics that the council member has just covered. All I can say is we're trying to address the desire to move quickly here, and there is no detail. I mean, that's the challenge you're facing.
So we're saying we're going to fund a program for a year with no detail. Is that what I'm understanding we're doing?
That is what you're doing. You're saying that you're going to step into this conversation. You're designating me as the authority, and we will have report back sessions. But that is the item in front of you, is to either at its base is to continue the contract as it is, or to give some latitude to the city manager within the dollar amount that was pre-approved to build a program that we're telling you, at least in rough estimates, is coming in at above 50% to create a housing first model for the 50-bed expansion at Samuel Jones Hall for year-round services. So again, the staff is perfectly okay. It will be challenging, but we'll be able to figure it out to go out for an RFP in 6 months immediately. Not to have a timetable. This is within council's prerogative to direct. But I do want to make it clear there are no details, and you're right to point that out.
Okay, so it then continues to concern me that we're talking about the RFP as far out as a year. But I can, since I'm hearing from colleagues that they're not sure there should be an RFP at all, I can take a year as the compromise position. I also noticed that the Tenant Legal Services Eviction Defense Fund that we passed a week ago is also listed under additional requests. Can you explain to me what the status of things are that are listed under additional requests?
There is, we probably should not have had this in the slideshow because this is about the contract. I think once again, it's staff trying to say we're working on a bunch of stuff.
Okay.
It is not meant to be a commentary or prioritization list.
Okay, thank you. That was my concern. I thought I saw 3 tiers, and I'm familiar with what happens to the 3rd tier in our other site, so I was concerned about that. I also want to follow up one question that came from the community cards. Has our police policy changed toward encampments? Because one of the cards expressed concern that we were already engaged in moving encampments or moving people along. The word sweep was used, though I dislike the term.
There's been no change. There's no change in police policy regarding this.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. And thank you, Mayor, for the opportunity to ask the questions.
Again, I want to ask a couple of questions for clarification. My understanding was that last week, before last week, this item was scheduled, or most of this item was scheduled, the continuation of the contract for Samuel Jones Hall with Catholic Charities as it has existed in the past. Last week, we decided to add the 50-bed year-round shelter with Housing First Services. We also, my understanding at the time was put enough money in there in the pool to provide other services, maybe not all of them that are listed, but some others. Those will be decided in our conversation on July 11th. I'll stop there and say, is that your understanding, staff, as well as our understanding up here at the council?
Well, we have collected as best we can a series of items to bring forward for discussion on the 11th. I'm happy if, I don't know if I can fit everything under the 11th, but we're working on a list of items to bring forward for some clarity. I've already told you one of the things that I'm struggling with and the team is struggling with is what exactly success looks like for the council. I'm not sure we're going to get an answer to that on the 11th, but we need to get into a conversation about what success looks like and what you need as a council from us to help us better understand what success looks like. But we also we have a series of other items out there that we're trying to compile to get to an answer. I'm not going to make a universal promise that we're going to get to everything on the 11th, but we're going to try to bring back as much as we're aware of, and I will apologize in advance if there's something that we missed, but we're going to try to be as comprehensive in that conversation as we can.
All right. The other thing I wanted to make sure that I understand, I thought last week the $75,000 for legal services was in addition to the $600,000.
It is in addition to the $600,000. That's why I'm saying this list, I think was just a list. It was not meant to be a prioritization or any other type of attempt.
Very good. Other questions, council?
Motion's on the table.
All right, we have a motion and a second on this item. Your votes, please.
Wait, I don't think we have a...
Do we not have
For 23?
So could I offer a friendly amendment then?
Sure.
Wait, let's make sure. Do we have a motion? I'm sorry. May we have a motion?
I move item 12.23 of the consent calendar and waive further reading of the text.
Second is amended, because we had some amendments for the cap on the city manager's salary.
Yes, that's correct.
I mean, not salary. Excuse me.
Sorry.
On the city manager's discretion.
Right, authority.
Mr. Schwedhelm.
And if I could just get clarification, because the language that I would want changed was only in the staff report, not on what the motion was. So does the language in the staff report in any way, shape, or form restrict what we can do or can't do?
No, it does not.
I'm fine then, thank you.
Okay. Council, your votes. And that passes unanimously. We're almost through with the consent calendar here. Would someone make a motion on 12.24, please?
I move 12.24.
Second.
Any discussion? Your votes. And that has 6 ayes on the homeless emergency continuation with Mr. Tibbetts abstaining. Thank you. Ms. Gomez, do we have any cards for public comment? Thank you. Dwayne DeWitt?
Thanks, sir.
Hello, my name is Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland, and I wanted to thank you for item 10.2.1 earlier in your agenda, in which you're working to put more money towards affordable housing. I also wanted to thank you for your efforts, which have begun to give a higher profile to the possibilities to house needy veterans who are seeking shelter. Today at the county, during a matter to find ways for more affordable housing, it was stated by the representative of the Veterans Affairs Office here in the area that there are 55 veterans who currently have what's known as a HUD, Housing Urban Development, Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Voucher, HUD-VASH voucher, none of which who can find a place to be. And that some of these veterans are losing the voucher after 120 days because they cannot find a place. So as I listened today to the over 55 speakers that were there, most of them all supportive of more affordable housing, especially for people such as veterans, it made me think back to how the city of Santa Rosa already has 2 3-bedroom houses over in Roseland that were previously occupied by rent-paying tenants, and the homes are currently empty. The possibility of putting in 3 separate veterans per 3-bedroom house would house 6 people and allow income to come to the city from the vouchers and help on the recreation and parks funding for the Roseland neighborhood, as we citizens call it. And it would be an opportunity to have these veterans participate in community activities and work with us as we do our frequent volunteer efforts out there. The approach could be taken right away and help people to have housing. The buildings are there. They're just boarded up because of a bureaucratic decision. And we're stunned that it's not being looked at as a possible way to help our community of Roseland and help needy veterans and give back to the community. That's what veterans want to do. They're more than willing to get out there and work for that opportunity. So please, take that under consideration, and then as you read the stories of the county meeting, realize that these issues will continue to go forward with your needs at helping to solve them. Thank you so much.
Peter Cherneff.
Good afternoon again. You know, where's a cop when you need one? So I'm going to publicly thank Hank. Chief Streeter came over and he gave me the answer. The movie was called Spotlight. And if you haven't seen it, you might want to see that one, and another one called Keepers that's on Netflix. You know, I've suggested before, whether it's you or whether it's Catholic Charities or whomever, that they create a homeless supply-demand listing vetted by law enforcement to make background checks, of which may or may not be considered by the person that might consider them to rent from them or do an exchange. You know, seniors or disabled paired up with a homeless that has a variety of skills to offer, for example, and or just other homeowners with needs in exchange for a room or even tent space in the back in exchange for some kind of work exchange. Or a tent space in a warehouse for larger groups in exchange for a 20-hour work week doing something that benefits seniors or veterans or the disabled or the city itself. There's a lot of things that they can do. There's a lot of very talented, skilled people that are on the streets, whether they're artists or whether they're labor skilled, what have you. But ultimately what you're dealing with is spiritual warfare. And I think you know that. So I wanted to share with you my concern about vaccines. In 2006, and to catch a predator in Petaluma, they caught Dr. Maurice Wallen, who was a specialist at blood impacts. He created the vaccines that has now murdered almost 9 million veterans, and 6 million more are terminal. His vaccines that he created are now being forced on school children, whereas the diseases that are put under these vaccines usually manifest 15 to 18 years after the injection. So I came across talking to a doctor the other day, and I received this list that vaccine manufacturers have no liability. They're not held to a double-blind gold standard. Their standard is the same as cosmetics. That their excise tax has now spent $3.1 billion to pay out to people that have been damaged or killed. Vaccines have plenty of mercury and aluminum, and mercury is now they're saying that has to do with autism. So you got a little conflict of what's being said. And doctors receive $400 per patient to make sure they get all the vaccines without telling what the problems are. Pharmaceutical companies spend 19 times more on advertising than they do research. And I will leave this list with your front person so that they can share this with the others.
Thank you, Mr. Chernoff.
You're very welcome to let me speak a little extra.
Susan Moore.
I'm here today to speak about the permanent Roseland Library. And I'm going to make a little comparison, then I'm going to talk about the library. Less than 15, 16 years ago, Roseland had no high school in the Roseland School District. They now have Roseland University Prep. Our new school will open in September. At that time, we had no money for that, but we managed to engage in that. Within about 8 years, it was listed in U.S. News and World Report as one of the top 100 high schools in the country. We now have the same opportunity to form a library that I think will be one of the best libraries probably, and will be written up all over this country, because we have like 150 community leaders that are on the advisory board for Roseland University Prep. I can tell you right now, it would take no time at all to have about 200 volunteers from around all of Sonoma County to volunteer in that library. They will be partnering with the Boy and Girls Club right there. There'll be a community center, low-cost housing, an open space for people to speak and gather, a water statement. It will become the absolute heart of the entire Roseland area. Now, in that Roseland library, the kids from Roseland University Prep can walk there. They have to do community service a certain number of hours. They will come over, and that will be where they will do it. They will tutor, they will mentor, they will read, they will help the kids with scholarships, how to get yourself into the junior college. It's very complicated to register there. I can tell you a million ways, but it's not just them, it will be the entire community. This will be a resource center, not just a library, ESL classes. There's going to be probably dental hygiene taught there, GED classes. I mean, the list is enormous of what can be done there. These are the only children in Sonoma County that do not have a library. They do not go home to families that have a library. They don't even have books, generally speaking. This will change the whole dynamics of this particular community, and I believe that you will get volunteers from all over to come in and teach them that the computer's not a toy, it's a tool. And I believe that what will happen will be that this will be the meeting place for the entire community. We will get this library, but we need your help. But we will get it. And I'm asking you to think about putting aside $500,000 for the next 3 years. I guarantee you that at some point that library is going to be built, and you're going to want to be part of it, because it's going to be one of the things that we're the most proud of in this entire community. I had lunch with, coffee with Herman Hernandez. He gave you a letter. He's in complete support of this library. The entire Latino community is. If you don't know this, 60% of the kids in elementary school, 64% are Latino now. They need to be educated. They need a library. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. William Bacon.
Thank you, general members of the Assembly, for allowing me to speak. I'm here to advocate 3 things tonight. One, I would like you to be aware that artists and musicians living in this county who are low income and struggling and still participating in things in the county have no place to live unless they're willing to conform to a tiny box, in a, normal apartment complex. which generally doesn't work out. We need some affordable artist housing. And I hope that, you know, the proposals that you're putting together will include things of that nature. I really believe that warehouse spaces converted to, you know, the model like at the Palms would be really valuable to this community and to the artists here. The second thing I'd like to address, and I'm not very versed in money and projects and all these things, but I'm very alarmed at the cuts in funding to safe parking spaces. Homeless people need a place to use a toilet at night, and telling them to find a gas station is not an adequate answer. And with these really hot times, it's not like it's something that people can choose or not choose to do. And if they can't find a place to use a lavatory, they're going to wind up using a tree or a park or a parking lot, you know, or somebody's building, you know, and this is going to cause, you know, medical issues, not only for homeless people, but for citizens of this city. Very concerned about that, and I really hope that you will work to help find a solution to this problem. The third thing is that when homeless people have pets, these animals, companion animals, sometimes are the only family that they have. And I know someone living in their car with 2 cats, you know, unable to go into any kind of shelter programs because she's not willing to give up those animals. You know, I really, really would like to believe that somehow these people and animals are going to find a solution, you know, where they can live in peace and, you know, find the same services that are being offered. And that's all I have to ask. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thomas Ells?
Thank you. Safe parking. And thank you for addressing that last time. Muchly appreciated. Safe parking, you can have your pets. They have lots of, one guy had 5 Malamutes in the back of his truck. And it's regular with those people. It's normal. They all have, a lot of them have pets. And that's why Jillian works out so great with those people and goes all around there and has been giving pet food for a long time, and quite wonderful. So pets. And they could, in fact, move into a community of tiny homes. It would be very much the same, very similar to what's in Sebastopol. Sebastopol's going to have Galen's Gardens, an area in the park as you're going over 12. And you reach Sebastopol, just on the left there was a mobile home park. It's kind of half mobiles and half motorhomes. And the city owned it for, I don't know, 10 years now and didn't know what to do with it. And now it's going to be given over to West County Community Services. West County Community Services is going to have an area of these, like reconditioned motorhomes for tiny homes. People can have pets. They can have pets. So safe parking works with the pets. And the reality is that those pets, they're maybe not a service animal, but they're the only consolation that those people have. And it's a certain kind of responsibility that they have to feed that animal. And that's a connection. It's a connection to a community. And there's a community of pet owners. And they become a community, and it's a different community than what is your typical homeless community. And that kind of community builds further community, and it's really valuable. For them, it's valuable for us too, because they stay out of trouble for the most part. I mean, you know, they even carry around their doggy bags, if you will. They carry around those, and it's a wonderful connection for people. And so I just want to, forgive me if I'm harping on the safe parking. It's a very important concept. It's very effective, and I'd like to expand that. Hope we can expand that a lot in the near future. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
Bob Hanson.
Good evening, everybody. I started this council meeting watching it on Channel 28, and I'm glad it's back on the air. Mr. Tibbetts was talking about stretching low housing contracts. I got a call a couple weeks ago from a friend of mine. He owns a couple acres adjacent to that 19 units you're building on the other side of the highway. His complaint was these crews were starting at 5 in the morning. They obviously don't know the start times for construction in our city. And after talking to residents around the project, they were starting at 5 in the morning because they were taking a siesta in the afternoon. I think that's a pretty good indication of where the crews are coming from. But I sat there for an hour and a half, 40-year retired carpenter, and I was embarrassed at the quality of construction being promoted in our city. There's an old saying, you get what you pay for. And as long as you're accepting low bids, you get what you pay for. I watched a guy with a set of nail bags, I guess he was a carpenter, where when I was working and I needed 4 8-foot 2x4s at the job site, I'd pick up 4 8-foot 2x4s. This crew picked up 1 and made 4 trips. That's the quality of construction. I know that nobody in our city council has worked construction. It's not your area of expertise. But if these are the contracts we're awarding for construction of our city, maybe we should turn that over to our building department. People who are qualified to judge the quality of construction. I also have a comment to Mrs. Combs. Salvation Army, part of your area, has gone open market. 40 years they've accepted HUD contract, HUD and HUD VAS contracts. As of last year, they didn't renew their HUD contract. They've gone open market. In my unit, I've seen 4 empty apartments that have been sitting empty for 5 months. Maybe we could address that. And that's only 1/4 of the building. 4 empty apartments for 5 months.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. That's all the cards I have. We'll move on to report items. Mr. McGlynn.
Item 14.1, report, resolution approving an amendment to professional services agreement with Wells Fargo Bank for depository and banking services. Deborah Lochner, Chief Financial Officer, presenting.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. One thing I did notice as I was looking at my copy of this item, the documents may be a little out of order. So within attachment A, you might have attachment A1. That actually goes as part of the exhibit A to the resolution. It should be attached to the agreement there. So I think it was just copied in the wrong order. I want to make sure that when we pass the resolution, there's a contract and an attachment A1 to the contract as part of that resolution. So just want to start there. The city of Santa Rosa completed a competitive process back in 2002, and at that time the city changed their banking relations from Bank of America to Wells Fargo Bank. We have continuously had Wells Fargo Bank providing depository and banking services to the city since 2002. In 2011 and 2014, that agreement was extended by letter to update the fees associated with the services provided. And each one of those letters extended the agreement for a set term of 3 years, along with those updated fees. The current agreement expires on June 30th, just in a very short time from now. We call that fiscal New Year's Eve. And in order to allow staff to compete, to provide another competitive process, we need some time to put the RFP out, review it, score it, and actually implement a change based on that RFP. Also, in the intervening time, there has subsequently been a downgrade of this bank by the federal government. State law does require that the bank has to be in good standing with the federal government to have city. That's another reason why we really need to look at changing our banking relationship. So the staff is proposing that we extend the agreement for 1 year to allow us to do this work and get a good competitive process in place. Authorize us to spend an amount not to exceed $400,000, which is above what we're currently spending. We currently spend a little under $350,000 a year, but this gives us enough as we have expanded our online acceptance of payments. Our banking fees have increased, so we don't really know what they're going to be over this next year, but $400,000, it should be less than that. The amounts are budgeted in every department's budget because it is a regular operating expense, so it doesn't affect the budget going forward. And in addition, we are asking the council to ratify those extension letters that were done in the past. So the benefit of doing this allows the city to maintain the continuity of banking services, which is important to us to make sure we have a banking relationship. It also, all our past changes to the service rates and terms of the agreement are being ratified with this agreement. And so it is recommended by the Finance Department that the council approve extending the current agreement for 1 additional year with a maximum, not to exceed amount of $400,000, and ratify the past letter agreements. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Ms. Lochner, you alluded to this, but I would like to ask you to more explicitly explain why we can't dump this bank right now.
So unwinding a banking relationship is very complicated, and even if we had a bank in line to change to, it would take several months to change all the different inner workings of what we do. We have to change out all the credit card machines citywide. We have to look at all the automatic uploads of payments and ACH and reports that we do all has to be changed. We, all the payments that we make are automatic. They all have to be changed. We have to notify the state, the county, and all the agencies that pay us money of new wire instructions. It's not an easy process to change your bank. That's why cities don't do it on a regular basis. It's very complicated and really involved. So just even understanding the proposals that are going to be coming in, we're going to be asking for some expert advice. We don't have staff on board that can look at that level of detail and really say what's the best service for the city. It's a very complicated relationship we have with our bank.
So are we in the process of creating a request for proposals right now?
We are. We have gotten a couple samples that I'm reviewing to see, kind of what other cities have done recently, what's been important to them to make sure, we continue with that. I do have our past RFP. We're looking and then help us score it. So there will be some additional work that we'll need to do. It will take us a little bit of time to put together those documents and get them out there.
All right. Thank you. Council, are there questions, further questions? Mr. Tibbetts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Lochner, what are the total deposits that we currently have with Wells Fargo, if you know?
Well, we did just send out an investment report, and not all that money is held by Wells Fargo, and we try to keep our operating account, our bank accounts with Wells Fargo lower. The city does have close to $400 million in various banking relationships invested. A good portion of that is at the state. Our daily balances fluctuate, and they'll be really high in December when we get property taxes and we start sending the money off for investments. So that balance fluctuates. If it's a pay week, it's higher, and if it's a non-pay week, it's lower. So it's hard to say. We do manage that float on a daily basis to make sure we have enough money in the bank, but it's every day it's different.
Okay, thank you. And one of the things here on page 3, authorize expenditures for the additional year in an amount not to exceed $400,000. Who receives the $400,000? Is that for working with somebody to generate a contract?
It's all the various fees you pay. So every online payment has a transaction fee. Every credit card has a merchant fee. If it's online, you have the merchant fee and the transaction fee. There's depository fees. There's fees for wire transfers. There's fees for ACH. Every single thing you do has a separate fee. And then also you get some credits that offset those fees. So while we show that we've only paid about $350,000 about their credits, actually what is paid in bank fees might be higher than that, but we don't have those records.
Okay, because that's what I was driving at, is if you're depositing hundreds of millions of dollars with a banking institution, the fees threw me off. Seeing it as an expenditure, you'd hope that, you know, even if it was 0.04%, which is I think the current rate for money market, you'd think that would still outweigh the $400,000.
Well, and that's why it's important to do an RFP to make sure we're getting the best fees, because every bank charges fees for all those services. And we need all the variety of services to be able to allow our public all the various options for payment, and also to allow us all the various options for payment as well.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Combs.
Thank you. Just for the public who might be wondering about our using Wells Fargo at all, I know that a few years ago we discussed emphasizing local banking and using local banks and local credit unions, and we discovered there were some difficulties associated with that. Could you explain why it is that we aren't just using local banking right now?
It's really complicated, but I can tell you most of the local banks don't have the assets in their system to be able to support the banking needs of an organization of this size.
So they have to have sort of like a balance.
They have to have a certain amount of money on deposit in the bank in order to have the guarantee for the deposits that they receive. And I'm not up on all the banking rules, but the local banks aren't quite large enough. Our last RFP, we did have a local bank that participated in the RFP, and they were pretty close. Oh, maybe this time they'll win.
So if we divided it, maybe we could use them.
There's not really a way to divide up your banking services because it's so interlinked and intertwined.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer.
But as Ms. Lochner said there, I mean, I think the challenging part of this conversation is that it's been since 2002 since the city has gained an RFP, so engaged where maybe there is a local provider that could manage city services.
Other questions, Council? I have one card on this. Shelley Browning.
Thank you. Hello, Mayor, council members. First of all, I'd just really like to thank you guys all for bringing this forward and for looking to terminate the city's banking relationship with Wells Fargo. The city of Berkeley is also looking to move their city's money from Wells Fargo, and they too will be extending their current banking services contract with Wells Fargo for 1 year, and that will conclude in May of 2018. And in the meantime, they are also building or constructing privately owned prisons. Discriminatory consumer and small business lending and servicing based on the federally protected classes established under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Fraudulent misconduct against clients, investors, debt holders, transactional counterparts, or the broader public. I'd like to ask that the City of Santa Rosa also include socially responsible criteria in our RFP for banking services. And I will send you all a copy of the Berkeley resolution for your reference. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Chertoff.
Oh, thank you. What do I know about banking? Not a whole lot, except that it sounds like, well, their inheritance, and it was the Three Stooges, and then they were facing 3 lawyers, and you know, they took out this tax and this tax and this tax, so this big bunch of money turned out to be about 14 nickels by the time they were done. So, you know, there's this bank, where is it, in South Dakota, which is not affiliated with the Fed. They're not in any kind of a debt, and you happen to be in a county that has a lot of wealthy people. And I bet some of these wealthy people are kind of sick and tired of the lawyers and the banking just as well. You could probably talk to some of these people and start your own Bank of California, your own Bank of Santa Rosa, and just cut out the baloney that this other person is telling you about, all these rules and regulations and intricate lawyerly games. Just cut them out. Make some calls. You know some of these people. Right? You got some of these big winery owners, some big movie stars, you got producers, you got all kinds of interesting people in this county that just by listening to me talk to you about this, they're probably going to be waiting in the next hour for you to call them. So go ahead and call them, use some common sense, put your foot down, and get rid of this nonsense federal regulated banks that the Fed shouldn't even be in our backyard anyways. But, you know, I know about as much banking as the Three Stooges, but I know a ripoff when I see one. So you guys are a lot smarter than me, so I submit that you consider this avenue as something that's very workable, very doable, and the money is here. Thank you.
Colleen Fernald.
Good afternoon. When I came to Sonoma County in 1982, I really didn't, until it wasn't working so well, and I was doing my banking in one of these big commercial banks here in the middle of your downtown, and then it wasn't so good anymore. And this was before the big bank bailout, before Occupy Wall Street. So when I see this issue on your agenda, and I know I've brought this to you before, your whole Go Local campaign, and you're not banking locally? Why? You fund your values, and what are they doing with the funds that they get? Ripping people off blatantly. And what else do they invest in? This is on your agenda, and you want to wait a year to make a decision? What about the big bank's bailout? And then all the headlines of Wells Fargo specifically cut doing illegal things. And you want to give them another year? There's something wrong here with this city. God knows. I and God know how much is wrong with this city, although God knows a lot more than me on the scope. I just know my personal experience. But the fact that I am using my time and breath to comment on this issue, when I don't have an automatic go find another bank at this point in time, come on, Santa Rosa, wake up. Stop serving the corporations, which I know you are one of, and serve the people here. Serve the businesses here. And we'll help keep an eye on these local banks if they're not doing so well, and you can help us. But there's a heck of a lot of money in your business of running this city, going in and out. And we see that these banks have been involved with laundering drug money. This isn't news, is it? It's facts. How long is it going to go on? How long are you going to continue to contribute to illegal practices and dirty businesses when you've got perfectly good ones, as far as I know? Exchange and Redwood Credit Union aren't involved in illegal practices. And I hope we have really good media to keep an eye on them, as well as conscientious citizens willing to take their time to speak up. Sorry, there's not a lot more here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Fernald. I urge you to look at the recording of the discussion that took place on this item before you came in. Council, Mr. Sawyer, you have this item.
I do, and just as mentioned before, Exhibit A and A1 are attached to this resolution. So I'll introduce a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa approving an amendment of depository and bank services agreement with Wells Fargo Bank, agreement number F008156, original agreement dated July 24th, 2002, and ratifying prior letter agreements and waive further reading.
Second. Council, your votes? Sorry, we have a comment or a question here. Mr. Tibbetts.
I'll be quick. I just really hope that we can look at our local ordinance first on our RFQ process before this comes back, because I don't need to say it, don't need to, how valuable it would be to be able to deposit locally.
And I'll just say, if there's a local bank that participates and, you know, if it has the services that we need and can meet the terms and conditions of the RFP, we certainly would consider them very highly.
Any further comments? Your votes. That passes with 7 ayes. Thank you. 14.2.
Item 14.2, report fiscal year end 2016-17 budget amendment. Deborah Lochner, Chief Financial Officer, presenting.
Hi again. So what we are going to talk about today is a year-end budget amendment. When we came to you, so we'll start at the beginning. Our fiscal year 16-17 budget was adopted last June 15th, 2016. We amended it in January of 2017 after the adoption of the 16-17 budget. So we've done our analysis and looked at the general fund primarily and determined that most of those raises that were given with those MOUs subsequently approved are going to be able to be absorbed within the general fund. We will we can move budget around amongst those departments under the city manager's authority, and we'll still be okay because there is some turn back in some areas and not so much in some other areas. So we're able to address some of those needs. However, there are a couple areas where we're not able to address those needs. In planning and economic development, they have brought in revenue over expectations, a significant amount of revenue over expectations. They are requesting that $445,000 of that revenue be recognized and then be added to their budget to allow them to hire consultants to help them augment the services of staff to get the work done that has been paid for. So that is essentially what the $445,000 is for. It would be $100,000 to go to planning consultants, $25,000 to help with the housing impact fee update, which is part of the housing action plan, $30,000 to support and prepare the density bonus ordinance, again, part of our housing action plan, $70,000 to support downtown development, and looking at some public-private partnerships on our opportunity sites, and $220,000 for the E-Plan software and hardware, which is the queuing system that we're looking to put into. It also allows for online appointments and other expanded services that can be done with that department. In addition to what is needed for planning and economic development, we have had 2 settlement payments from North Bay Corporation on the amount we charged them for not maintaining the contract the way we expected. So as part of that settlement, we've received 2 of the 3 payments. We are recommending that we recognize that revenue and set it aside as we continue to assess the use of the settlement funds. A good portion of that is likely to come back to the general fund, but we need to continue to assess our audit, our contract, our garbage contract, and making sure that that we get that new contract in place. So this is really going to be used to augment that service. We don't know exactly what that's going to be costing, but we're setting that aside to allow the city manager to expend it for those purposes. So again, it's recognizing revenue and appropriating that revenue into a project account that would then be spent for these services that have been identified, and ultimately a good portion of that would come back to the general fund, but we're not exactly certain what the needs are yet. So our proposed adjustment is just under $2 million of revenues and an equal amount of expenditures. There's no overall effect to the general fund by making these adjustments because we are recognizing revenue that was not budgeted and then appropriating it. So the benefits are it allows us to increase our appropriations for those revenues, particularly in PED for services paid for, to allow consultants to augment and provide those services as best we can. And it allows us to encumber those funds and carry them forward in the 17-18 budget so that those services can get provided. We can get more of those permits processed through the department. It will address some workload issues within the department. So it is recommended by the city manager and the finance department that the council amend the fiscal year 16-17 budget as set forth in Exhibit A, which shows you the adjustments just under $2 million of both revenue and expenditure.
Council, other questions? Mr. Rogers.
My only question is really why we're having this conversation a week after budget, and why didn't we have this conversation in sort of the totality of looking at the next year's budget?
Because this is not part of the 17-18 budget, we wanted to make sure that we had the discussions on 17-18 separately and that was fully vetted through the council. We didn't want to confuse the issue by having 16-17 year-end amendment and a 17-18 budget, and sometimes the subjects get a little meshed together. So we want to keep them very separated.
Okay.
Mr. Swedhelm.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. I have a question about the North Bay settlement and the garbage franchise analysis. So what I heard you just say, that's going to be sitting in this account. So did I also hear you correctly? The city manager has the authority within his spending levels to use those resources for and only for the garbage franchise analysis or things related to the new contract?
That is not, it's not solely for that. The council can make that direction. That is the intention, but there might be, again, it comes down to city manager tried to give up all his contingency in the 17-18 budget. There may have been some additional, use here, but that's the intention, is to do that fee analysis and ensure that we're doing the audit in the first year, which the garbage company is supposed to pay for, but sometimes you have to advance fund those things. So
I guess I'm comfortable if it stays related to garbage. I mean, we heard the earlier discussion of homeless.
And again, I think that is the intent, is that it's a garbage analysis fee. I mean, we haven't tackled that issue. That's part of that's coming up hopefully in the next few weeks, which will give us more clarity on this resource. Right now, the only intent on this resource is to be a resource around, that's why it's labeled garbage franchise analysis. And once that commitment is done, then any remaining fees collected from this distribution will be back to the general fund. But at this point, we still have a ways to go. We have a ways to go on that garbage franchise question. And so that's the reason it's sitting in limbo, is we don't know what we'll potentially need to advance against that project.
And would you be coming back to council when all the funds have been received and the analysis
Absolutely,
is complete?
absolutely.
So what we're making the adjustment on, those are funds that are already received. There is one additional payment expected in August. But this is funds already received, including the interest, and we're just appropriating that right now until the project's completed, in which case then, like this city manager said, those funds would really be released back to the general fund, and they'd go into our unassigned fund balance.
Great. Thank you.
Ms. Combs.
I heard what you said. I think I need to hear it again, if you don't mind. Do you actually anticipate that the garbage franchise analysis will be $1.5 million?
I hope not. I mean, again, I think there's a lot of questions still on until we get a provider in place and we know who the provider is and what the what the necessary requirements are going to be out of that, there's a huge unknown here. We're walking into an unknown. I will give you, there may be reasons why, I'm loath to get into that contract conversation. We're not intending to expend it. We just could foresee that there would be issues down the road where we would have to advance to ensure that the city had a appropriate level of service in this area. So it could be beyond analysis. We would be bringing any of that back. I think analysis also could be an implementation conversation as well. And again, here's the best I could give you. For example, if there was no contractor able to meet a service deadline by the January 1st end of the contract, there may be a need to continue service with somebody not under contract. I mean, this is where I'm getting into speculative behavior. You understand what I'm talking about?
I do, but I'm trying to figure out what comes back to us and what doesn't.
It will all come back to you.
So if you need to spend part of this beyond analysis for garbage related, we would hear about it.
Yes.
And for not garbage related, we would hear about it.
There is no intent to expend this dollars beyond garbage related issues. And remember, I have an authority to spend up to $100,000 on any one particular thing. There's a built-in requirement. So I'm not planning to go out there and spend $1.5 million here.
And how we're interpreting the one particular thing is, it could be interesting because is it to one entity or is it on one item? I'd like to have that conversation.
Well, and I think some of these things are unknown and they're going to be unfolding. And so again, I want to assure the council the intent is once we've identified any costs that are around a transition for our if there is whatever it ends up happening as it relates to the garbage contract, the only reason we're retaining access to these fees and probably garbage franchise analysis, maybe not the best term, but it's about the garbage franchise and relating that to the garbage franchise and then any unexpensed balance around that. And again, there's only a certain amount of authority we have to do as staff would be brought back to the council and re-released to the general fund. We would make that very, very clear.
Thank you.
Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I'd be safe in saying that in this process of selecting a garbage hauler, there have been some surprising and unexpected twists and turns. And I'm, for one, am very comfortable with having these funds not allocated at this time because I've been so surprised by those twists and turns. So that's all I can say. It has been quite a journey.
Ms. McGlynn, I think it would be helpful if and when that money is needed to be expended toward garbage, whatever, that you keep the council apprised as that happens.
Absolutely.
And when whatever balance is returned to the general fund, a notification of that specific amount would be helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely, council member.
And the final payment of that settlement in August, what's the size of that?
Each payment was $750,000.
Okay, so this will balloon to $2.25 million at that point.
And there may be additional funds if a transaction is completed regarding if there is a future sale of the current contract to another provider. So there could be additional funds applied to this as well beyond the settlement amount, but this is specifically about a settlement amount.
Okay, so I just want to be clear, we're talking about at least $2.25 million.
And they're also paying interest on it, so we'll receive interest on the August payment.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any cards on this. And Mr. Schwedhelm has the item.
Thank you. I'd move a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa amending the fiscal year 2016-2017 budget and waive further reading the text.
A second.
Your votes? That has 7 ayes. 14.3.
14.3, report purchase of computer through Dell Inc. Christy Bartlett, Information Technology Manager, presenting.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Christy Bartlett, and I'm the IT Operations Manager for the Information Technology Department. And tonight I'm bringing you approval to purchase city computers through Dell Inc. So some background, the Information Technology Department purchases and supports approximately 1,800 PCs, laptops, and tablets for city staff use, and has designed a selection, purchasing, and deployment process optimized for efficiency and cost management. This process with Dell allows the IT department to standardize and streamline the ordering and management of the PCs with one technician supporting the city PC program. The city has been purchasing Dell computers through a competitively awarded agreement known as NASPO since 2007. In fiscal year 2013-14, we created a centralized PC program in the IT department. And you can see we ramped up. 438,000 was the first year. We had a lot of old PCs that we had to replace, and so that was the first year of ramping up. And then subsequent years has been about $250,000 a year to purchase between 250, 300 PCs for the departments. And each department now contributes about 1/5 of the cost into our budget, into the PC program's budget, to pay for those PCs. So it is the recommendation of the IT department to standardize on Dell for all desktop and laptop computers, utilizing the WSCA-NASPO Cooperative Purchase Agreement to purchase computers from Dell, and to authorize the amount not to exceed $1.5 million over the next 5 years for the purchase of computers from Dell, and that the council ratifies past computer equipment purchases from Dell Inc. made in accordance with the WSCA-NASPO Cooperative Agreement and the California Participating Addendum from fiscal year 13-14 to the present. And that's all I have. Any questions?
And if I may, I do want to just note that you also on this item have a slightly revised resolution before you. It's in red line. You should have a red line copy and a clean copy as well. There are no substantive changes to the resolution. It's simply some really clerical clarifications.
Thank you. Councilor, are there questions on this? No questions and no cards. Mr. Rogers has this.
I will move the resolution of the council of the city of Santa Rosa approving the use of the WSCA NASPO Cooperative Purchase Agreement and California Participating Addendum for the purchase of computer equipment through Dell Inc. in the cumulative total of $1.5 million over a period ending June 30th, 2022, and ratifying past purchases, the red line version, and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Your votes, council. That passes unanimously. Thank you.
Item 14.4, report urgency ordinance to impose temporary moratorium on the outdoor cultivation of cannabis for commercial purposes. David Guin, Director of Planning and Economic Development, presenting.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor Corsi and members of the council. We are here to extend the emergency ordinance that we were in front of you with a few weeks back on the outdoor cultivation. As you remember, up here, a lot of regulations have been put in place that has given the council and local authorities the ability to restrict certain types of cannabis activity. In particular, today, what we're talking about is outdoor cultivation. And even since this chart was posted for this meeting, things have evolved since then with the governor's trailer bill passing, which has moved to try to move together the McPherson and Alma medical side and the adult use side that we are evaluating now and will be bringing forward as part of our comprehensive ordinance.
Mr. Guin, I want to stop you for just a minute and ask you to please be careful to be specific that this is the commercial cultivation, outdoor commercial cultivation that we're talking about.
Absolutely, thank you. And I'll go back to this, the original slide, the intro, is we are talking about commercial outdoor cultivation, and I'll mention that too here in the next slide, that the decision of the council was to focus specifically on commercial outdoor cultivation, not personal use of outdoor cultivation. Again, just a reminder, the local jurisdiction does have the ability to provide limits in their community, and that's what we discussed at the last item. None of that has changed in the proposed regulations that are coming forth from the state. The way we stand now, as of today, our code currently regulates commercial cultivation of medical cannabis in certain zones. We have it located in certain areas in town, industrial locations. The city code does not preclude commercial cultivation for applying for an outdoor permit. The council did enact a 45-day temporary prohibition on outdoor cultivation for commercial purposes, and that was put in place on May 23rd, and that expires on July 7th. So we're back today to extend that, and we'll talk about what we've done since and why the reason is we need to extend it. In addition, our city code precludes commercial cultivation either indoor or outdoor for non-medical use. So the adult use side, we currently prohibit that. The temporary moratorium was put in place for a number of reasons, primarily the commercial cultivation and the impacts it has on the community if it's an outdoor, and not being able to mitigate the effects of a large-scale cultivation facility. We are currently in the process of developing our land use regulations, and we are planning to release our draft regulations at the end of this month, next Friday. Those will be out to the public. The public will have a chance to review that. We'll accept comments. We'll hold a public meeting at night in these chambers. All that information will be sent out hopefully by the end of this week, and we'll bring that back to the cannabis subcommittee to talk through what comments we received. And then that package will then move on to the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council, which will be adopted or heard by the City Council by the end of the year. And that will coincide with the state starting to issue their permits January 1st of 2018. And as a reminder, as the mayor mentioned, this moratorium only affects outdoor commercial cultivation of cannabis. It does not affect the current state and local allowances for personal use or possession of cannabis, personal cultivation of cannabis outdoors, indoors, or mixed light, or the commercial indoor or mixed light cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, or dispensing of medical cannabis. So it's very specific on what this action is tonight. So with that, it's recommended that the council adopts an urgency ordinance to extend the temporary prohibition of the outdoor cultivation of cannabis for commercial purposes to allow the time of development of the appropriate regulations.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may, I just want to clarify that state law limited our initial moratorium to 45 days, which is why it was a 45-day period. State law now allows the council to extend that up to 10 months and 15 days this time around.
Thank you. Council, are there questions on this item? No questions. I do have one card. Colleen Fernald.
Who benefits from this ordinance, primarily? Who will be the largest benefactor of having to grow all the marijuana, natural medicine, indoors? PG&E? Could say Sonoma Clean Power, too. I remember how PG&E worked with law enforcement to identify indoor pot grows based on their high energy use, so they probably know about how much power's involved. And you have goals to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So for every extra kilowatt used, because you're not using the natural free sun, you're going to a for-profit energy company or so-called alternative. Anyway, so I'm Colleen Fernald. I am a licensed medical marijuana user. I use it for medicine, And when I go to a dispensary, I have to pay a higher price, but I get to say, I want outdoor, organic, sativa medicine. Help me with my physical and emotional challenges. And you've benefited from me getting my license here, from me making my purchases here when I didn't go to Sebastopol, because I'm considering where my tax dollar goes and how it's used, what your values are versus theirs or the county's. And so there's a problem with this ordinance, with sunshine not being used to grow medicine. And when I want to try to find a better price and I go to a direct provider, if you'd been with me on the subcommittee, you'd know, because Councilmember Combs knows that what I experienced with the theft and the violence, when I had nothing to do with that business, where it's happened repeatedly. So those kinds of risks. So how can we have law enforcement help guard the outdoor grows and help your tax base by that? But I want to get back to the doctor from Santa Rosa that I used in my conversation with her about how we can truth up and how you can be involved in truthing up the medical value and the risks. How you use it, how it's grown. If it's not organic, is that really helping me with my medical needs? All these things matter in great detail, that the truth is clear and revealed, and I hope you can get involved in that process. But I like to see hemp grown outdoor in Santa Rosa, backyard grows and big commercial grows. Hemp that the police could use without any risk to their job, and the CBDs could be helpful to them emotionally and physically. All right, so using plants as medicine, growing them organically, creating a tax base, a tourism industry, all the benefits that we get from that free sunshine versus, oh yeah, you'll get the rent from the big commercial grow house spaces. Yeah, I know, you'll get the money some other way, but is that really helping your citizens? And when it comes to the smell with outdoor grows, have you been next to a vineyard when they spray their chemicals? I've been in a vineyard in our winery, and I don't like the way that that process smells. So
Thank you, Ms. Fennell.
let's look at the real risks and values. Thank you.
Mr. Oliveris, you have this item.
Thank you, Mayor. I will introduce an urgency and interim ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa to extend a temporary moratorium on the outdoor cultivation of cannabis for commercial purposes within the City of Santa Rosa, and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Your votes, please. That passes with 7 ayes. On to our public hearing. Mr. McGlynn.
Item 15.1, public hearing, D and J Carriage Homes rezoning, 818, 819, 824 Aston Avenue. File number REZ 15-006, Patrick Streeter, Senior Planner, presenting.
Thank you, Mayor Corsi and members of the council. The item before you is a proposed rezoning for 3 parcels on Aston Avenue. The rezoning would accommodate a residential development that proposes 18 market rate apartment units. So in regards to the housing action plan that the city is currently pursuing, this would be 0.7% of that goal. So it would supply some of those market rate housing units that the city is trying to encourage development of by the year 2022. The project includes a zoning map amendment that would rezone those 3 parcels from a planned development district, so a custom zoning district, to one of the city's base zoning districts, which is R318, which is a multifamily residential development district. As was mentioned previously, this project there is a project associated with this rezoning, and that would be an 18-unit multifamily residential development. The project is located in southeast Santa Rosa on Aston Avenue. And the parcel is currently developed with some unattached residential structures. To the east and west are multifamily residential apartment developments. To the north is a mix of single-family and multifamily development, and to the south are county jurisdiction single-family houses. The project site would take access off of Aston Avenue But also in the development to the east, there's a stub end of the proposed Aston Circle. That street would be continued through this development with the potential for further development to the west, should those properties have a new project in the future. In 2015, applications for design review and the rezoning were submitted regarding this project. A neighborhood meeting was held the same year. In 2016, revised plans were submitted. This had to do with meeting the city's standards for road dimension and parking requirements, and resulted in the loss of 2 units from the proposed development. The project received preliminary design review in December of 2016, which was followed by final design review from the Design Review Board in March. And in May, the proposed rezoning went before the Planning Commission, at which it received unanimous approval for recommendation that the council rezone the properties. The general plan for the area is medium-density residential. The 18 units proposed in this project would result in density of 15 units per acre, which is in line with the general plan policy of having residential development be at the midpoint or higher of the allowed development densities. The rezoning would also allow for development to occur on this site that is currently restricted by the zoning. So the rezoning would accommodate a general plan type of development for this site. As was previously mentioned, the site is zoned currently as a planned development district. This district was put in place in 1973 and was broad across a large area, so it was never intended to be parcel specific. So over the decades since that zoning was put in place, several other areas have been rezoned to accommodate development. And the proposed rezoning of R318 would be consistent with the general plan for this area of the city. As was mentioned, the project has gone through design review. It went before the board as a concept item in 2014 and received preliminary and final design review at the end of 2016 and earlier this year. The project has been reviewed in compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act. It's a development that's consistent with the city's general plan, to which an environmental impact report has already been prepared. This is supported through a traffic study as well as a stormwater analysis that were prepared for the project, and there are no project-specific impacts that have been identified by staff. 2 of the issues that were looked at include on-site circulation. So as was previously mentioned, there's a requirement that Aston Circle be continued through this project and connect to any future development. And there was also the rezoning originally requested a planned development zoning district. That's the way typically rezonings have occurred in the area, but they can be restrictive, usually containing requirements that a specific project be developed on the site. So staff recommended that instead a phase zoning district be applied, so that if this current project that's proposed isn't constructed, the site is not restricted in the future for some other proposal. So as was mentioned previously, the Aston Circle would be continued through the site. A private drive would connect to Aston Way, and also there's a requirement for maintenance access to an easement that runs along the south edge of the property. And the potential exists to continue Aston Circle further along to the west, should it be necessary in the future. And as was mentioned, this rezoning would bring it into a base zoning district, which is the R318. It's still surrounded by planned development districts, and a lot of those are custom planned development districts for those proposed projects, whether built or not built. Public comments received regarding this project have all been specific about the development project proposed, not the rezoning, and they've had to do with the speed of vehicles that travel on Aston Avenue as well as Aston Circle, operational concerns about the rental housing, and also the parking that's proposed for the project and use of the garages. The project does meet all the city standards for required on-site and off-street parking. So considering the project is consistent with the general plan and staff has not identified any issues with this rezoning, Planning and Economic Development is recommending, and the Planning Commission are recommending, that the City Council approve the rezoning of the properties at 818, 819, and 824 Aston Avenue from a PD to an R318 multifamily residential district. And staff is available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Council, are there questions on this item? I have a couple. Are these all rental units or for sale?
Yeah, so the approved project would be all rental and one on-site manager unit.
And the developer is paying in lieu fees rather than affordable units?
Yep, so that's the current proposal would be to pay those in lieu fees, but there is the flexibility that in compliance with our housing allocation plan, the developer could propose on-site affordable units.
And has that discussion been had with the developer?
I don't believe it has been.
Okay. This is a more general question for the planning department. When does that discussion occur in the course of entitlement?
So there is no requirement currently, as the council knows, for on-site inclusionary affordable units. But when a project has 70 or more units, there is a requirement for a discussion with staff. So we have those on the larger projects. And so this is a small project, and that's why that discussion, to my knowledge, didn't happen.
Okay. I think it would be worthwhile to have that discussion with every developer. Obviously, we can't require it in this case until we either change the policies or do something else. But given that it is our highest priority, I think it's worth having the discussion. Just throw that out there. Mr. Streeter, did you say that Santa Ana Drive south of this is in the county?
Yes, so that's Santa Ana Drive, that's south of the project, and those are all county jurisdiction.
Is that a single neighborhood that's an island, a county island down there?
I would have to look at the city's maps. I'm not aware if it's a border or if it's a county island.
Okay. This is a public hearing, and I'll open the public hearing. Ms. Gomez, do we have any speaker cards on this? Is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the council on this issue? Seeing no one rise, I'll close the public hearing. And Ms. Combs, you have this item. Ms.
Thank
Combs,
you.
Excuse me.
I think we have questions still or comments?
One question here.
Sorry, I just had one that came up. I think the mayor asked a really good question about is it your protocol to have conversations about doing on-site affordable or inclusionary housing whenever you meet with a developer? And it sounds like it's not. Do we need to just convey to you verbally in order to make that happen, or do we need to do a more formal process via resolution to establish that? I think it's very important that one of the first conversations you have is how do we help you do inclusionary housing?
You just have to convey it verbally.
Okay. Conveyed.
And
Ms.
again, yes. Ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa amending Title 20 of the Santa Rosa City Code, reclassification of property located at 818, 819, and 824 Aston Avenue, APNS 038-202-016-018-022 to the R-3-18 Multifamily Residential District, file number REZ 15-006, and waive further reading of the text.
Second. Council, your votes? That passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you for building housing.
Mr. McGlynn, written communications.
Item 16.1, letter to oppose SB 649, wireless and small cell to telecommunications facilities provided for information.
Thank you. We have a couple of cards for final public comment. And Ms. Seeley, there's one in front of you, Ms. Fernald.
Actually, I just put in a card for 16.1 before general public comment, please.
I didn't receive that one, I'm sorry.
I'm a little handicapped and slow.
I have a card for 17.
And
Go ahead and make your comment on 16.1.
Thank you. I was rushing up here to try to read the letter opposing it so that I could be more informed on the specifics. But not knowing that, I want to appeal for the health of everyone in this community, that we get some, before you go approving more wireless and other telecommunications facilities, towers, receivers, whatever, things that can impact not only human health, but things like bees that are critical to human health. Bees, the pollinators, I want you to think about the impacts and that we find a way to get to the science to it. And the EMF Safety Network has a lot of that science. They have documentaries that would be beneficial to share with you all so that you can see the real risks and what you're going to have to do to mitigate for all the towers that you already have right here, right now. And we're electrical bodies. And I have my AM radio in my car, really low budget, and I drive by a big cell tower. My frequency is impacted by that. I have to stop and think what it's doing to my body. I'm a hypocrite. I got a cell phone right here. I try to limit my use. But if you think you're going to solve your budget problems by taking those fees to pop up towers everywhere that you can, we already get this signal everywhere. There's no dead spots. It's all about mega gigs. And what changes are happening to humanity that we are staring at these devices countless hours in addition to what I'm talking about, these frequencies, different types of frequencies, and how are they really affecting us? So if you go ahead and do approvals for ordinances for all this technology without really knowing the unadulterated science behind cause and effect, you're putting yourself personally and every citizen here and financially at risk. Because once you've lost your health, how hard is it to buy it back? And if we've lost the bees and there are no more pollinators, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Have all genetically modified food grown? Okay, so cause and effect. I could speak on every single issue on your agenda. But this is my dime, my time, my aching body. No one's paying me to be here. I just know Sandy Maurer. I appreciate her work, the EMF Safety Network, electrical magnetic frequency. So even if this is not directly related to what's in front of you, please evaluate, please. Because who is going to speak for the bees, right? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Seeley.
I want to thank you for this letter that is going to be sent, because it is another brave effort to say we need to retain local control of things like this. When there is legislation at the state level that mandates that localities do things by right, that tells me that that legislation has been bought by a special interest that doesn't want any local interference, no matter what the problems might be. And so I think it's a really smart thing for this council to put out the word that we're not going to go along with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Final public comment. Ms. Fernald, were you done, or do you have more?
Colleen Fernald, and you know what? I'd rather not be here commenting right now. Had my issues been addressed and we were working on it proactively in a way to mitigate your risks, if I'd received the courtesy of a return phone call when I request meeting with your attorney, your risk management on addressing these concerns, or any of you on my request for an agenda item to produce a subcommittee to address the fatal flaws that have been the result of at least second degree, if not first degree murder of Charlotte Anna Molinari by at least one party, John Charles Molinari. In addition to the issues to be addressed in the subcommittee and with your risk management attorney are Dylan Zara, my daughter's after-school care worker, who is being investigated by Santa Rosa Police, domestic assault, sexual violence, whatever that division is. We have a problem when obstruction of justice happens not only at your police department within your city hall, but in the DA's office. And I had factual information to deliver to the prosecutor of Dylan Zara about more victims besides the ones that the FBI caught when he was sexually assaulting the 5-year-old in the house, and the parent didn't even know it. So I tell the prosecutor, my daughter might have been a victim, and the other children attending her school might have been a victim. My daughter was friends with Dylan Zara on Facebook until I sent a Facebook notice saying he's going to prison for his crimes. So when I'm asking your police department to help proactively, and I don't get it, we have more than just my rape. We have more than just John Charles Molinari's involvement in prostitution, which evidence was delivered to the police department. The child pornography he was producing. Were they children or adults? Investigate before you even go do legitimate investigation in the rape. And what happens when that child who's witness to these crimes goes missing? And there is reason for expediency in locating her, and you don't get it from law enforcement, FBI, anywhere. On the preventable deaths in this city, 3 years went by with those things not being tended to. Her death was preventable. How are you going to address it with me? First, second degree. How are we going to get to the bottom of who specifically, how far wide the scope needs to go? I'm doing it here on public comment for the world to see, so that maybe there is truth and justice somewhere with eyes on this city, this state, this county, this country. Has your police department had that virus where they take your data and they want you to buy it back, the ransomware? I've seen it happen at multiple police departments, and I really have to wonder what's behind that.
Thank you, Ms.
So let's sit
Bernal.
down and have these issues out.
Thank you, Ms. Bernal. Thank you, Ms. Bernal. I'm going to adjourn the meeting tonight in memory of Ken Blackman, our former city manager. I think that anybody who knew Ken or knew anything about him knows that he did a great job for Santa Rosa for a long time. He had a big impact on this community and left a lot of himself in the places that we see every day. Adjourning Ken Blackman's name.